The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there, except when they don't, because every week the historian Ian Wilson joins me for our regular feature, If Only We'd Known, explaining why actually the present rather closely resembles the past. Today we're talking about Andy Burnham's call to consider whether Britain should have a written constitution. Welcome to the show, Ian Wilson.
Thanks, Ed.
So let's start with what we do have. We don't have a written constitution. We have a series of charters, acts, court rulings, traditions dating from Magna Carta onwards. Isn't it time we tidied all this up, Ian Wilson?
Well, I don't see what the purpose of that would be. We've got a pretty awful selection of political parties in this country. We've got a semi-efficient civil service. But the one thing which is rather good about the way the country is run is the Constitution, which has evolved slowly. You say since Magna Carta, you could say going back further. And we have the institution of Parliament, so that, for example, a complicated question like how the different parts of the United Kingdom are run can be determined in a parliamentary way. Andy Burnham says that we must have a written constitution to explain and to make clearer how we develop devolution. But he seems to be overlooking the fact that Northern Ireland devolved in 1921 and Scotland had devolution in 1998. And since 1998, there have been a number of changes which the Scots needed, and those have been worked out perfectly satisfactorily between the two parliaments of Holyrood and Westminster. So I don't really see why we need a written constitution to help with devolution. As for all the other things, when you look at countries which do have a fixed written constitution, it doesn't do them very much good.
Well, surely Linda Colley, somebody was texting in earlier to ask which historian debated a written constitution recently on Times Radio. It was Linda Colley with Ryan Tubridy. She made the point, 2 points really. One is that Germany, after the war, was given a written constitution by the Allies, and it's mainly driven by the British. So we're quite good at giving other countries written constitutions, and for a country like Germany picking itself up after World War II, particularly after what happened after the Weimar Republic, a written constitution has proved to be a good thing. Well,
it was a good thing. It was, put it this way, it was better than having the Third Reich being run by Hitler.
That's true.
And I think Linda Colley would agree with that. I think most sensible people would agree with that. Linda Colley is a wonderful historian, so I don't want to cross swords with her. I wonder if she saying that she wanted to have the written constitution that we recommended to Germany in 1945 imposed here.
Well, she was saying it was potentially quite a good model. I mean, I think the interesting thing about the American Constitution, for example, is first of all, it acts as a sort of document about America's enduring democratic values, and it also provides a sort of constant. I mean, you mentioned earlier devolution. I mean, because Parliament cannot bind its successors, the next Parliament could simply abolish the Scottish Parliament. There would be no checks at all on a decision to make that, which a written constitution might provide, Ian Wilson.
It could, but it's very unlikely to do that. In fact, I can't envisage any situation in which a Westminster Parliament would abolish the Scottish Parliament. And indeed, there'd be plenty of very good lawyers in Scotland who would point out that it wasn't legal to do so. If you look at a country in Europe that has a written constitution, Spain, and what's happened there in relation to the Basque country, to the Catalans, they are in the most terrible difficulties because every single decision about the degree of independence which the Catalans want to enjoy in Barcelona is challenged from Madrid. And indeed, they were in the ridiculous position not long ago of the Catalan Prime Minister having to go into hiding because he was being arrested by the Spanish police for wanting independence, whereas in Northern Ireland, for example, Sinn Féin want to have an independent Ireland, a united Ireland. That's a perfectly legal thing to want, just as it's perfectly legal for the Scottish Nationalists and the Welsh Nationalists. They're not, we don't send the police north of the border to arrest the Scottish Nationalists. The Spaniards are sending people across to Barcelona to arrest perfectly legitimate politicians. That's the sort of rigid thing you get when you have a written constitution. Look at the gun laws in the United States. It was enshrined in the first Constitution of the United States that every free American was entitled to bear arms. It might have been a sensible thing to say to settlers in the 18th century, but now the result of that fixed constitutional right to bear arms means that they live in a trigger-happy country where these terrible gun massacres are happening in schools and supermarkets every few months in the United States.
I mean, the example I think that Linda Colley gave of a constitution that she admired was the Scandinavian countries, which regularly refresh their constitutions. I mean, even if we had a written constitution, it wouldn't necessarily be set in aspic. I mean, the American Constitution itself has been updated. So were we to put together a constitution now, we could update it every few decades to recognise what you've just identified, that one particular right might have become outdated.
Yes, of course we could. But my point is, we already have that situation. We've got Parliament. That's what Parliament's doing every session. It's updating the laws. It's thinking, well, this particular thing, let's think of the right to, or not to have assisted dying. That's something which Parliament has been laboriously debating on our behalf, and that's going to be or not be part of our constitution. You don't need to invent a new written constitution to bring about that very desirable state of affairs that you talk about. We've got what the Scandinavians have. We've got the freedom to change our constitution.
And Boris Johnson famously advised the Queen to prorogue Parliament, and it was the Supreme Court that had to step in. Wouldn't it be better if we left fewer of these decisions to the courts and had a written constitution which clearly defined the limits of the powers, for example, of the Prime Minister, clearly defined the relationship between the House of Commons and the House of Lords and so forth?
I'm not completely sure about that. I mean, obviously, Boris Johnson was behaving irresponsibly when he gave that advice to the monarch. I don't think anybody would question that, who was a reasonable person. But you see, has it really been thought through by the advocates of a written constitution? Has it been thought through by the Prime Minister? If we introduced a written constitution now, apart from being immensely expensive, you'd have to be concentrating not just on these big state questions like can a Prime Minister advise a sovereign to prorogue Parliament? You'd be thinking, should we have an elected judiciary? How do we provide civil servants? Do we have an elected civil service? Every aspect of British public life, which at present is covered by the Constitution, would have to be included in this enormous document, the written Constitution. It would take years of work by constitutional experts, by lawyers, by civil servants and others, wasting time and money, in my opinion, to produce something which is actually more or less what we've got anyway.
Absolutely. Well, Ian Wilson, thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us a historian's tour of the unwritten constitution versus the written constitution.